I would like to invite Dmytro Shimkiv, who is the deputy head of the presidential administration responsible for implementation of reforms. He will tell about the results of the visit of Ukrainian delegation to the World Economic Forum in Davos. Ladies and gentlemen, greetings. Today I would like to give a digest comment on the trip of Ukrainian delegation to Davos, answer some questions, and give you an update on some of the initiatives on reforms. First of all, the main topic of Davos Forum was the issue of terrorism and security in the world, and that was discussed in the lobbies of Davos. From the stage, it was very important that the President of Ukraine, Poroshenko, spoke in the Central Hall of Congress Hall. This speech was very emotional and very focused, with a specific example of the actions of terrorists which are sponsored by Russian Federation against Ukraine. The feedback that we received, we saw the audience and the feedback, and when talking to people in the lobby, we understood that there's a big solidarity with Ukraine, there's understanding of the difficulty of the situation, and the main thesis is that Ukraine is defending the security of Europe and global security. At the same time, some politicians and some international commentators, especially on economic issues, were trying to avoid carefully the issue of Russia, even though the session on the future of Russia was very busy. It was impossible to get in there. And I believe that we saw the demonstration of the hypocrisy of Russian politicians and Russian businessmen who were saying that they're ready to eat less, but they are ready to stand with their leader to the very end. In general, the Russian delegation and the position of some Russian businessmen surprised a lot, because I know many of them personally, but it was a surprise. They are either very much afraid or they have changed significantly. That is my personal observation. It was important that Ukrainian delegation managed to achieve the main thing. It managed to start building serious level of trust from international politicians, investors, financial economic analysts to Ukraine. That is very important, because during many years the actions of the previous authorities of Yanukovych, they were directed towards destroying the trust to Ukraine, and Russia is doing everything so that the CSIS failed state, Ukraine failed state, becomes reality. They're trying to achieve it via terrorists. They're trying to put these words into the mouths of some journalists and bloggers. The most important thing was that Ukrainian delegation, headed by the president, proved that that is not so. We had many meetings. We had meetings with journalists of publications and TV channels. We had meetings with investors. I'll talk about that a little bit more. The trust to the state is formed starting from the trust to people, the trust to the president, the trust to the representatives of the government, the trust to those people who are doing everything to create a different country. And that was the main thing that was achieved by Ukrainian delegation, because the trust to Ukraine grows in financial, economic, and political sense. The trust is based on certain achievements, and that is what was discussed there. When we were demonstrating, I was telling a lot about the steps which was started in reforms. In any reform, deregulation, decentralization, judicial, anti-corruption, corruption, there were certain steps made, and then we're talking about 7 or 8 months, weeks that the new government is operating. That is very, very little when talking about any reforms. In most countries, the reforms were much slower. We also need to understand that Ukraine is a democracy, and it was nice to hear that from Soros and Thomas Friedman and Emmanuel Barroso, who confirmed the thesis. I trust this team. That's important, and also the fact that in Ukraine we have democracy, but not the decision of one person as to reforms. That is also a very important element, because in case with Georgia and Singapore, the decisions were made unilaterally by one person, and then these decisions were implemented by a team. We now have a democratic parliament, a democratic discussion, and we see that in relation to any reforms taking place in Ukraine. The main thesis that we were discussing were the issues of security and support of Ukraine, assisting by the pressure on Russia to stop the war in the east of Ukraine. The second issue on financial security and financial stability of Ukraine. There were many meetings held. I would like to personally thank Natalia Yareska, who had many negotiations with the IMF, the World Bank, the representatives of central banks of Europe, the representatives of Asian region, as to cooperation and possibility to form the package of assistance to Ukraine. I was present at some of these meetings. I am so happy for Ukraine that Ukraine has such a Minister of Finance. That is the level, the world, global level of the Minister of Finance. Now talking about investments, there were several meetings held. It was important to emphasize that there are some industries in Ukraine that, despite the military economic situation, are very profitable. In particular, that's demonstrated by agricultural sector of high tech. We see how investors are interested in these two sectors mostly. The tender on 3G investors are looking at that as an indicator, and they believe that will be an important marker for investment attractiveness of Ukraine. I had a meeting with Ericsson company. Ericsson has one of the development centers, and we were discussing how they could expand this center in Ukraine. And I would like to mention another interesting person, because his personal example is quite an interesting example. That's one of the co-founder Wimpelcom, Ogi Fabel, American, who set up Wimpelcom and then made it public company. He's a serial investor, innovation investor. We were discussing the serious event in Ukraine in inviting international investors in high-tech sector, and the president of Ukraine was referring to him in his speech. Besides being the investor and famous entrepreneur, he serves in police. Some time ago, as an interpreter, he organized a private helicopter unit for police in Chicago, and now, well, the policemen are working there, but that is done for private money. It reminds of what's happening in Ukraine, when the entrepreneurs can set up the instruments of the state-private partnership for the benefit of the state. And the next thing is, he's now the sheriff. He graduated from the police academy, and he's a policeman. And the experience of introducing high-tech and reforming police is another interesting experience that Ukraine can make use of. And we discussed that as well. That is the example of what people are present in Davos. I received a letter from him, and he says that I have always been and I will be the friend of Ukraine. That's the position of international investor.
Besides, we had the meetings with the Minister of Commerce, Ms. Brisker, and other governmental figures from abroad. If you're talking about the financial support of Ukraine and the prospects for investments, major conclusions I made from Davos meetings. We must ensure peace and stability in the world over. And Ukraine is a very important component element of the international security, and that's why the role of the international community to preserve peace in Ukraine is a key one. And this was actually corroborated by many governmental figures from the private sector. Number two, Ukraine has all the chances to obtain additional financial support. We are talking about the financial aid to be given to Ukraine. This is a subject of negotiation. So now we have to continue the reforms. This is what we can do, which is in our hands. And then next point is the trust. We have to ensure trust. We must not lose it. And what's being done by the government, by the politicians, the civil community, and all the people in Ukraine. This is the only chance how we can actually confront or oppose the Putin's propaganda about the failed state. This is maybe exhausts my information about Davos. Maybe I can answer some of your questions, and then, well, if you're talking about some of the reform initiatives, I would like to talk about the very important discussion, or a very important element about this reform. When we're talking about the bill 1656, which was taken care of by a special group, 32 experts, including experts from the European Council, OSCE, etc. And then there are a lot of people from Nova Ukraine, etc., etc. Very often they say that only 2 people represent the administration president of Ukraine out of 32. It's very important that this law is focused on the judges, because the quality of the people, and Davos actually confirmed that the issue of the people is very most important. That's why this law focuses on the court judges, and the clearance or the cleaning the let's say judicial core, and we are going to take care of that in specific provisions of the law. Speaking about different kind of effect and influence, etc., etc., it's very important that if we're talking about this piece of legislation, which will be discussed by many different people, it's very important that the experts do read the provisions which are now the subject of discussion. This is going to help a lot to the efficiency of discussion. So then, legal reform is one of the most important and indicative to the investors. Many of they talk a lot about this prospect of this reform and its influence and the role of that. We prepared the first package of the bills or the draft laws about the transparent Ukraine or digital Ukraine. You're talking about the electronic democracy and electronic petition law, the possibility for the citizens to use the electronic means to address the governmental agencies, following the example of the United States and Germany. The second draft law is dealing with the open data, state register, public registers, which makes the government agencies to actually to give the information in the digital form through electronic means. We plan for the 2nd of February to have the meeting of the government, where they are going to talk about the state traffic inspectorate, traffic police, judicial reform, anti-corruption reform, and some others which are really most urgent and topical, which were discussed during the previous meeting. Beyond this, that will be all. The major topic was Davos, of course. And thank you for your attention, and I'm prepared to take your questions, if any. Wall Street Journal to continue this Davos topic. He actually asked you previously what would be in October, what would be your grade for the position of Ukraine. You said F grade. So what they're doing now, with what the situation changed? Do you plan some other resources when all the indicators are they have some kind of checklist for the reform? What is being done according to each separate reform, maybe oriented to the Western readers, would be interesting for our Western readers. Thank you very much. My grade would be now C plus. We seriously improve the situation. We have absolutely new cabinet ministers, well orientated to achieve the results, and this is a very important element of the democracy in Ukraine. Very often we believe this is taken for granted, but when in the government only one person doesn't speak English and all the rest are fluent English, and not only they speak fluently, but they understand the sense of the economy, and they can actually, let's say, they have this dialogue with European countries according to European standards. When the generals speak English, and there are some guys from our country in Davos, actually we represent a different, absolutely normal, civilized country, what source meant the new Ukraine. So what we done just to show the untruths or the lies. If you're talking about the Russian media, you can take the example of what they show on the TV channels about Ukraine, what's going on here.
So, talking about resource, I take it as personal. I'm talking to the fourth organization that promises to create for me the site reforms in UA. My patience is almost over because for that the reforms in UA was set up. I hope that we will launch it because that's where all the information resources had to be. They do have some information. We download the documents there. There are discussions. You can see them. But we need to create more professional website. We lack communication because practically all the TV channels, to all the journalists, I was just explaining what was launched, and for many of them, it was in use. They did not know the communication strategies to be improved. I believe that judicial reform and anti-corruption bureau are the priorities now. It's important with all the initiatives that were launched to continue. It is very important, and I emphasize that in Davos. If we look at the time that we spend, I have 18, 19 hours a day when I work. Very often myself and my colleagues in the government, we are working on economy, on legislation, on economic reforms, financial, social reforms, and then suddenly the act of terrorism, and practically everyone starts looking at tactical resolution of tasks because that's war. Everything done by terrorists and sponsored by Russians militants that breaks your normal work. That's not just, that's the fact. I cannot stretch 24 hours. So I would like to emphasize that it is very important now, with all the complexity of the situation, not to continue only tactical things. We need to continue both tactical and strategic tasks. Thank you, Dmytro. And Verkhovna Rada recognized Russia as the aggressor. 272 MPs voted for that, and we requested support from the West. Thank you. And there was a question, let me answer. Do you have time? Yes, I have. Man-Inform agency. The experts believe that the trade-over of Ukraine with the countries of Persian Gulf could replace the good turnover with Russian Federation. Or, well, is Ukraine planning to develop active trade relations with other regions of the world? And will the public council be set up on that? The public council for cooperation with the Arab world or Latin America? I understand. I would like to say that we're not just planning, we are doing it. There are some industries. If we're talking about military industrial complex, about science, about agriculture, there's cooperation going on in these sectors, but I would like to mention the visit of the president to Saudi Arabia was very important. The opportunity to meet with world leaders was very important, also paying tribute to the person who was respected highly in the Arab world. I'm sure that Ukraine may have big markets in the Arab world, just like in Latin America. And even our dialogues with the representatives of Chinese business during Davos provide plenty of opportunities. But we need to understand that decision on investments and cooperation is not made within 5 minutes or within one meeting. That's the series of meetings. It's a process of negotiations. It's forming the trust. All those who were conducting previous negotiations, they are famous as the robbers of the country, and they ran away. And the international partners want to restore cooperation with Ukraine, and for that, forming trust is very important. And that is true talking about any person who has Ukrainian citizenship and who supports Ukraine. We need to do everything possible, and that was done by all the team that worked in Davos. Thank you. And one more. Okay. I will request Dmytro to answer it in the lobby, but our next briefing is with the Lithuanian delegation.